We turn now to a major case that has dominated the headlines for months now. Jury selection in the trial of Sean Diddy Combs begins tomorrow. And I did want to give you just a little bit of a background on this, as the trial will start tomorrow, beginning with jury selection at a federal courthouse in Manhattan. Testimony will likely start the following week. The three-time Grammy winner was indicted last September and has been since held in a federal jail in Brooklyn after judges ruled that he would be a threat to intimidate witnesses and victims if released. The 17-page indictment against Combs accuses him of using employees of his business endeavors, including record labels, a recording studio, an apparel line, an alcoholic spirits company, a marketing agency, a media company, and television network to facilitate his crimes through acts that included kidnapping, arson, and bribery. If convicted on all charges, which include racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking, and transporting people across state lines to engage in prostitution, Combs faces a possible sentence of decades in prison. I do want to bring in criminal attorney Eric Faddis to speak more on this. And Eric, I appreciate you joining us here on Live Now from Fox.
Be with you, Stephanie.
So this case is going to have a lot of bombshell testimony, no doubt. But I want to start with jury selection that's expected to begin tomorrow. When it comes to what an ideal juror is for the defense and for the prosecution, what are each side looking for a juror?
Yeah, Stephanie, I think the defense is going to look for people who are open to non-traditional lifestyles, who can receive evidence of what defensible sort of style as sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and not get put off and not rush to judgment. On the flip side, the prosecution is going to be looking for folks who are not going to be distracted by, the new shiny object over here, who are not going to get off course by any kind of circus the Diddy team may try to bring into this trial.
So, I mean, this has garnered much media attention. How does that factor in when it comes to selecting a jury? Because no doubt most people have heard of what is going on.
Totally. So it presents a significant problem. Here's the thing. The judge wants to find jurors who are fair and impartial and who have not already developed an opinion as to Diddy's guilt or innocence. Well, that's hard when every media outlet in the world has covered this case. They've likely already heard about it. And so what the judge is going to have to do is determine how much exposure the potential jurors have had to this Diddy saga, and whether they can put that aside and simply base their verdict on what happens inside that courtroom and not everything that has gone on preceding that.
I also want to ask you this. One of Combs' attorney, and you mentioned this, the lifestyle of the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. One of Combs' attorneys had mentioned, my client is not perfect, but everything that was done, was involving consensual adults. There are, there's a lot of evidence, particularly the one with the videotape of Sean Diddy Combs and his then girlfriend, Cassie, showing that he was punching, kicking, and then dragging her inside an LA hotel. How significant is that piece of evidence? The Combs attorneys, they didn't want this to be included. A judge ruled that it could be. So how pivotal is this particular piece of evidence?
The video of the Cassie Ventura assault can't be underestimated. So it's clearly inflammatory. Anyone who watches it, it evokes a feeling of, oh my gosh, I feel bad for this person. When we talk about the legal relevance of it, I think it goes more towards the RICO charge and less towards the sex trafficking charge, to show that Diddy engages in violence and threats of violence to silence people, to get his way. But of course, prosecutors will try to weave that video into the sex trafficking charges, as Cassie Ventura is listed as victim number one in the sex trafficking count.
So let's talk about those charges, because obviously the prosecutors have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt some of these charges. What do they have to present to actually indict Combs? Because a lot of this, is perhaps bad behavior, and no doubt his defense team is going to paint it as such. But how does it rise to the level of, let's say, racketeering and all these other charges?
Sure. So the first charge is racketeering. That is a law that was really developed to go after mafioso types, to go after crime families. Here, that they're saying that Bad Boy Entertainment was a criminal enterprise and that Diddy engaged in multiple acts of predicate offenses. Those are listed as arson, bribery, kidnapping, that kind of thing. And that all of that was done in relation to and perhaps in furtherance of that criminal enterprise. Second, they are charging 2 counts of human or sex trafficking by fraud, force, or coercion. That's essentially that a commercial sex act was committed by fraud, force, or coercion. The prosecution is going to talk about drugging and that sort of thing. Lastly, they're charging interstate, essentially like an interstate act where Diddy's team recruited a commercial sex worker, helped them transport that person across state lines for a commercial sex act. And so those are really the basics of the elements that the prosecution is going to seek to prove at trial.
You know, we're going to hear from many witnesses, taking the stand. When you take a look at the scope of this trial, with jury selection beginning tomorrow and then likely testimony the following week, how long do you think this trial is going to last?
I think some of the estimates that I've seen seem on the low end. I think this is going for weeks, if not months. This is a very involved indictment. It includes alleged offenses that span almost 2 decades, and there are going to be multiple witnesses and law enforcement investigators and everything under the sun. The jury's going to hear about all of that, and then the defense also has a chance to put on their case. They're going to put on their witnesses and try to establish that, hey, these acts, although they might be unsavory in some folks' eyes, they were not non-consensual, and because of that, they were not criminal acts.
There's been also a lot of discussion about whether Sean Diddy Combs himself will take the stand. Defense teams often shy away from that, even if, someone is very keen on, sharing their perspective, their truth. Do you think that's going to happen, or do you think that he is not going to take the stand?
Yikes. I would absolutely advise him not to take the stand, in part because there's so much impeachment material that he would be confronted with while on the stand. Look at the Cassie video in and of itself. The prosecutor would walk through that in painstaking detail and say, hey, is this you, kicking your girlfriend in the stomach while she's on the ground? Is this you dragging her by her hair? Don't you understand that that could cause pain to somebody or cause them to be intimidated? Was that part of your design all along? All of these questions could be damning for Diddy, and I doubt that he would take the stand.
From your perspective as a criminal attorney, as we see this trial unfold, are you keeping a very close eye on anything in particular, whether it be certain witnesses, whether it be certain pieces of evidence? What are you really focusing on?
One thing that's really going to matter, I think, is how Cassie Ventura, victim 1, presents on the stand. She is a superstar, and she has alleged that she was sex trafficked and also physically assaulted and everything else. If she could convey the emotional reality of what she says happened to the jury, make them feel what she felt in those moments, that is going to go a long way. On the other hand, if she comes off as kind of a disgruntled and jilted former ex-lover who has an axe to grind against Diddy, that is going to score points for the defense. And so really her testimony is going to be key in this trial.
So, do you expect her to be the first witness called to the stand, or do you think that they're going to save that testimony to the very end?
I'm not sure that they want to just play their entire hand right out of the gate. I think you sort of build up to it. You set the stage. You probably have some law enforcement witnesses who will talk about what Bad Boy Entertainment is, the investigation into the activities of that organization, and how that sort of gave rise to Diddy's feeling powerful and like he's untouchable, and then go into the specific acts that are alleged against Diddy with respect to sex trafficking, physical abuse, and that kind of thing.
Eric, is going to be very interesting to see what comes of it. This is out of a New York City courtroom, so no cameras allowed inside, but oftentimes we do get some of those photos prior to them closing the doors to the media. It's going to be very interesting to see what comes out of it, and no doubt, Eric, we're going to be speaking with you again, but we appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Good to be with you.
And jury selection does begin tomorrow in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, I should say. As we mentioned, no cameras allowed inside the courtroom, but we are going to share all of the developments as they happen right here on Live Now from Fox. We'll be right back.